Hello, hello. Welcome back to another episode of Ser Tu Mismo to Be Yourself podcast. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for watching. I shared in the first part of this second series about how, why, and what I went to Puerto Rico for the month of January. And in this second part, I am going to be sharing all about the plant of cacao because that is what the theme was for the whole trip. And if you are someone like me that likes to integrate new things, tools, and plans, foods, or habits that help your body, mind, and soul, then you are in the right place because that is what cacao does for you. It has so many benefits physically, mentally, and spiritually. And I want to talk all about it. Coming from my perspective and from what I experienced specifically at Fazenda Mercedes in Puerto Rico, because I do have to say that this plant of cacao is grown in other parts of the world, in other countries, and the flower itself, the way it grows is the same, but once it becomes a fruit of cacao and the process it takes from being a fruit to chocolate can vary depending on the person, depending on the owner of the land. And I can only speak for what I lived and experienced at Fazenda Mercedes, which is in Utuado, in the middle of the island of Puerto Rico. So as I mentioned in the first part, the plant of cacao was introduced to me in 2024, specifically at a cacao ceremony in Madre Tierra Wellness Farm, which is a farm in Livingston, Texas. I have talked about that farm here on the podcast and also made some posts on the Ser Tu Mismo podcast Instagram page as well. And it was very impactful for me because I discovered the spiritual community where I met a lot of people that seemed to have similar beliefs like me, and it was the very first time that I came across two real people in person like that other than on the internet. And it was also the first time that I tried cacao, and I understood the spiritual side of it, but I had never truly connected with the plant itself, so I didn't know more of it than what it was shown to me, which was the cacao drink. Of course, I do remember they mentioned, the workers. We honored the farm workers that process the cacao. But one thing is someone telling you about it, just like right now that you're listening to me. It's one thing that you're taking in this information, but it's going to be a whole different other experience whenever you actually try the cacao. And then if you ever get to go to an actual cacao tal, that's what it's called, a land that processes or grows cacao, that's going to be a whole other experience itself too. So I had been introduced to it, seen the spiritual side. I understood the spiritual side of it, but it was completely different once I was over there in Puerto Rico. I saw a whole other side. I got to connect to the plant at a deeper level, and I realized that there are people actually dedicating their lives to this plant, to processing it. There's a lot of patience involved. There's a lot of care for the land. There's a whole process and respect as well that is involved when doing or dealing with the plant itself. And that brings me to think that sometimes we consume things without truly understanding where they come from. So to explain a little bit about the process of it, I first have to explain how it's even grown. So it all starts by this tiny little flower that grows in the trees of cacao, and this tiny little flower gets pollinated by a very specific insect that is so tiny, almost not even the size of a mosquito. And once it gets pollinated, obviously the petals close and it starts to grow, and it's a very tiny little flower that grows into this big old fruit of cacao. I like to say it's almost like the size of a papaya, and it varies in colors depending on the type of trees, because I believe the trees that she has, that La Doctora Luz has at Fazenda, come from different parts of different countries, different parts of the world. So it kind of depends on what it's mixed with. I'm not too sure about that, but the colors vary from orange, yellow, green, burgundy. And I remember walking into the Cacao with her the very first day that we got there, and she was explaining, look, these are the little flowers, it gets pollinated, and we saw all kinds of, we saw the little flowers, but we also saw the ones that were already pollinated, and the ones that were already growing, and the ones that were already ready to get picked up. So we were able to see all of that. And mind you, this is in the middle of the mountains. So one thing that stood out to me was, looking to the side and just seeing this scenery of green, jungle looking like, scenery. And it was so peaceful. Mucha tranquilidad, like this tranquility, if I'm saying it right, that just walked with you as you walked through the trees of El Cacao, and lizards passing by, hearing all kinds of birds and animals singing. It was very scenic. It was very like if I was in a movie, kind of, at least that's how it felt like the very first day. And even afterwards, I continued. I remember just looking out and being like, wow, I can't believe I'm here. This is so beautiful. And breathing it in, it smelled so much like nature. It smelled so different than what we're used to here in the city. So walking through El Cacao, I felt this connection with Mother Nature. It immediately felt like time was just slowing down. It taught me to have so much respect for living things and to have gratitude, to ask permission from the land, which is something that I had already practiced before going to Puerto Rico. I remember, every time that I go to the beach or to a park or anywhere in nature, I always think in my head, I come with respect and with your permission. And I think about it as if someone was to come into my home, I expect them to come with good intentions. I expect them to come with respect and to treat my place with respect, right? And so this earth and nature itself is our home too, and it's their home and we're living in it, right? So that's the way I see it when it comes to asking for permission. And but being there in Puerto Rico, and specifically in Fazenda, it just kind of emphasized it even more to continue to do that. It kind of just stood out more as well as having respect for living things and that connection with Mother Nature. And so one of the things that stood out to me was when we were walking through the field the very first day, and she was showing us all these, stages of the fruit. There were also some fruits that didn't make it, and they obviously looked like they had rotten. They were dark, they were black. And she told us, when you see these, feel free to take it out of the tree and, just throw it on the floor, lay it on the floor, and tell it thank you for your sacrifice. And that just hit me different because I compared it to how it is when it comes to humans. Sometimes there are souls on earth that don't get to live their full life, and it's the same thing when it comes to cacao. I mean, and of course you might think or say, well, it's the same thing when it comes to anything or everything, but seeing it and being there, it's a whole different experience. I can't truly explain that for you to fully understand but I just think it's consciousness and respect. I think that most people move through life consuming things unconsciously, and I realized that although not everything survives and not everything completes the journey, even what didn't make it still had a purpose. So that's why when she said that, I was like, wait, what? And ever since then, now that I've been here in Houston, when I am working with my plants, when I take out leaves or petals or things that, the plant or the flower may have that is no longer in fruition, I just take it out and I say, thank you for your sacrifice, because it's a way of honoring it. It's a living thing. And of course, if us as humans, when we die, we get to be honored, why can't we do something small for the other living things that are around us that, make this earth a beautiful place? So when she said that, it just kind of hit me different, and I was like, I am taking that moving forward with everything else. And so it was just beautiful to see that and experience that as well. Now I want to get into the process of cacao. Of course, this was I just shared a little bit of how it was when I first got there, and the first things that we did, how it becomes a fruit. But now, after it becomes a fruit, the cacao gets picked up, which was one of the first things that we also did. The very next day, we went into the field and picked up cacao that was already on the floor. We also cut off some cacao that was already ready to get cut off from the trees. And I think it was about 500 or 600, I don't know, somewhere between 600 cacao fruits that we picked up. And again, this is the process that I learned and lived in Fazenda, but it can be different in other parts of the, different cut trees that grow the plant as well. So once it gets picked up, we washed it. Well, I didn't wash that. I'm not going to lie. That was not one of my duties, but I know it got washed. And once it gets washed, it gets cut half opened. And that's another part that I also didn't do, because to cut cacao fruit is not for the weak. All right. It is a very thick layer that covers the seeds inside. And I think it's also called in Spanish drupa. And you have to use a lot of strength to cut halfway through it. But once it was cut, then I was able to get the seeds out, what I just mentioned, drupa. I don't know how to say it in English, but I will try to put pictures on the video for those who are watching on YouTube. But once we took out the seeds, we had to despegarlas, like teníamos que lay them down y despegarlas, because they come in the fruit like connected and all like in a strand together and coated in this like white layer that also has benefits. I don't know exactly what, but that white layer that is coated in also can be consumed as well, and it also has benefits for the body. But in this case, we took that out and we like sorted them out into a bowl, and we did that for all 600 something cacao fruits. And of course, it didn't feel like a lot because it was a group of us, doing it all together. But of course, for one or two people, it is a ton of work. And so once the seeds would get collected, they would go into another section where they get fermented. And the process of fermentation depends on how hot it is outside as well, and it depends on a lot of things. When it's summer, I believe the fermentation process is a lot shorter, but when we were there, which was in January, it did take a couple of days. And the fermentation process, what it does, it cooks the seeds, and that white coat layer that I mentioned that it has basically gets evaporated. And so once it gets evaporated, the color of the seed changes completely. Instead of white, it becomes brown. And so it was very interesting to see that process of it change. And once it is fully cooked, the seed is fully cooked, it gets washed again and dried out, and eventually it gets toasted as well. It could be in a pan or an air fryer. And once they have been toasted, they are now ready to get peeled. And with the shells of cacao, La Doctora Luz actually makes a tea off of that. It's called Te Sana. That's the title of her tea. And this tea also obviously has benefits. And I believe that if you squeeze some lime into this tea, it brings out like the magnesium, and it improves iron levels. So if you want to know more about that, definitely make your own research. But that is what I was told from her specifically. And so we obviously, we peel the seeds and we put the shells on one side so they can get packaged for the tea, and then the seed gets put to the side. Some of those seeds can actually be eaten just like that. It's 100% raw cacao, and those are what they're called cacao nibs. So maybe you have seen at a grocery store like Whole Foods or Sprouts, sometimes, or Trader Joe, sometimes they have cacao nibs, and that is what those cacao seeds become. However, if you want to make it into chocolate, then it goes into this machine that is processing that chocolate for like 24 hours. It's just like kind of going in circles. I don't know what's the word, okay? But it goes into this machine for 24 hours, and the next day you will see dark, 100% dark chocolate. So that is how it becomes into chocolate, that whole process. So mind you, first it has to grow, this flower has to grow into this cacao fruit, and then after that there's this whole process before it comes into our hands as a chocolate. And that whole process honestly just kind of blew my mind, because it was the very first time that I saw something from scratch all the way to wrapped up into a nice little delicious and savory chocolate. And so one of my favorite things that I found very therapeutic was peeling these seeds. Why? Because when we would peel the seeds, we would be chatting the whole time. La Doctora Luz would be talking about her journey with el cacao, her stories, life and perspective, and I loved and enjoyed picking her brain and also talking about my journey and my perspective as well, things that I was learning about el cacao. And it was just so lovely. I was like, I can do this all this time. It just kind of like slowed down time. It made me feel like, oh, I have all the time of the world. And I was just peeling, listening, chatting. And it was one of my favorite parts of helping, with el cacao. And just knowing that this would eventually become chocolate felt just so beautiful. I was like, I can't believe this is going to be chocolate that I'm going to eat. Because we weren't like mass producing. We were just being present. We were creating intentionally. We were participating in something handmade and alive. And that is something very different compared to this modern, fast-paced culture that we live in here in the States, where we always have to be producing more and more and more. And we have to, we feel like we're in a rush. And it was a total opposite of that. Instead of feeling like this rush or feeling like we had to aggressively finish, it was more intentional and observing what we were creating intentionally. So that was very, very beautiful as well. And also knowing that most of the chocolate that we eat or that we've eaten before, talking past tense for myself, a lot of it, a lot of this commercial chocolate is filled with a lot of additives. It already has, they add milk, they add sugar, they add processed ingredients, and it is essentially stripped away from its purest form. By the time that we eat that Snickers, that Kit Kat, the whatever Reese's, it's no longer the purest form of chocolate. It's just sugar, milk, and all these other additives and processed ingredients. And not that I'm saying this to fearmonger around chocolate. Hey, do what you feel is right for yourself. There are definitely certain things that I know that are not healthy for my body, but I might still have here and there. But it's just a fact. It's a fact that it is stripped away from its purest form, that the commercial chocolate that we eat has definitely no good benefits for our health. And knowing that the one that we were working with, that we were helping, that we were witnessing actually does, just again blew my mind. And I was like, I don't ever want to stop eating or drinking real raw 100% dark chocolate, because it holds so much in it, so much for our body, mind, and soul. It's almost like once I tasted cacao, the experience completely changed for me. And also, La Doctora Luz would share about how she has worked with patients, and she still does work with patients that take a cacao to support their wellness with cholesterol, with type 2 diabetes, with their emotional well-being and other things. And that was also very eye-opening, and I was very impressed by the fact that it helps real people with their journey in their health, and it just kind of comes to show how we actually have access to all these things. It doesn't have to be about medication and going to the doctor all the time. We have access to natural things nowadays, and that felt like such an honor and privilege to know and hear about these real people that are taking it, and not to say that it cures any of that, but it helps with that as well. It helps with different health issues that people may have. Now, again, this is what I learned. This is what I heard from La Doctora Luz. Not that I'm saying that this cures or anything like that. It is just what I learned and experienced while I was over there. And so to end this second part of the series, I think overall it wasn't just about cacao. I think it was about presence, gratitude, slowing down, intentionality, respect for nature, connecting to creation, and understanding where things come from, and participating in the process of something instead of just consuming the final product. Because again, one thing is hearing about cacao, and another thing is actually touching it, smelling it, harvesting it, peeling it, tasting it in its purest form, and witnessing every step of the journey. This experience definitely deepened my respect, not only for cacao, but for nature, the process, and life itself. So thank you again for tuning in or watching this second part of the second series. Stay tuned for the third part, where I will continue to share more about this trip. Stay tuned for that. And if you haven't yet joined the Amor Propio Collective community, I invite you to subscribe, where I send out emails, newsletters with updates, reflections, and tools that you can take for this never-ending journey of self-love and self-improvement. Thank you again, and I will talk to you soon.